So hello everyone, my name is Kostas Karpouzis and I'm representing a team coming from two universities in Athens, Greece. Most of the other people are sociologists and games researchers. I'm a computer engineer and also a games researcher in recent years. And I'm going to describe our work in progress regarding how immigration can be reflected on the gameplay and the description and mechanics of children's games. As you may know, we have quite a few immigrants and refugees in Greece. So this is part of an attempt to integrate, especially the children that stay in Greece, either in transit or choosing Greece as their country of final destination. So our work initiated from viewing games as a form of narrative. And if you look into games either in their digital form or in their analog form, you will see that they share quite a few elements and conventions with books, theater plays, or cinema. For instance, players almost always play the part of a hero that has to go on a conquest towards a target, and this target may be a place like Mordor in Lord of the Rings, for instance, or in simpler narratives like Super Mario, it may be a person, like, for instance, the princess that Super Mario wants to save. And between our hero and their object of interest, there are a number of obstacles that need to be overcome, or other adversaries that want to actually harm the hero, or they want to have a share of the prize themselves. And in the special case of games, again, this holds for both the analog and digital forms. We have the added element of strategy. So each individual player may choose to view the narrative or live the narrative with a different timeline, as we like to say, or also play in a different manner. For instance, play the game from start to end without solving all the quests or without facing all the enemies and obstacles, just to reach the end and realize the game objectives. And this is, I would say, a unique case that cannot be found in classical or conventional narrative forms like books or cinema. So if we begin to take into account the cultural context that is described in a game, we have two different forces, so to speak, that of the designer. The designers actually enforce their artistic freedom using the game narrative and designing the game world and the environment. But the player has also the freedom to execute the mechanics in order to achieve the game objectives during gameplay. And as I said earlier, this is actually a very rare form of narrative that gives consumers or viewers or players, in that case, some artistic freedom. And we see in the evolution of the game narratives and the game mechanics, we see some changes that may be attributed to changes in society or very important events that happen in a society, such as the war or recession. So the interplay between societal changes and games is very evident, and this is actually what we're trying to identify here. So from the point of view of the player, the games combine the narrative with the player experience, and in this process, they give them, through the game mechanics, the opportunity to realize their aims, their personal aims, and have some emotions evoked in the process. And these emotions may include a rapport with the different game characters, their own character or the non-player characters, for instance. They may include engagement with the different emotions expressed by those player characters, and also a sense of unexpected. And this is actually a very strange situation, because we want games to depict some sort of reality, but also we want to experience unexpected events that make those games interesting and engaging. And apart from that, there's an interplay between the aims that each player has, the game mechanics that the game offers to us in order to realize those aims, and the skills that we have in order to use those mechanics to achieve those aims. So each player has a different skill set and level of skills, and the game should be designed in such a manner that it should cater for the improvement of those skills. Of course, depending on the game genre and the different mechanics that are involved, we usually see that games involve different sets of skills. So those skills combined with the game mechanics result to the player performance. Again, this is an interplay between what I can do and what I have to do in order to succeed in the game. And usually I can do that through the game interface and the different mechanisms that the game offers. So in the case that we don't have a purely luck game, such as dice, for instance, so that's the case when games demand skills, our hopes and fears when we're coming to the game environment are closely related with our ability to implement the objectives that are required for our hero, the player character that we control. So to wrap this up, we can see that the performance that we have in the game, which, as I said earlier, is a combination of the game mechanics and our skills to use those mechanics, results to either self-respect if we manage to play the game as we expect to, or disappointment. And the scale and the magnitude of the emotions that we experience usually has to do with the image that we have regarding our own skills. So if I expect the game to be easy, this usually means that I think that I have the necessary skills to perform well in the game. And if I don't, then I may be disappointed. Moving to a transcultural context, in the case that people move to different countries or are forced to move based on specific events such as war or recession, as I said earlier, usually games are part of the tradition that people carry with them. And this is an important part because games are usually related to the sense of fun. Fun is actually a sentiment and emotion that we cannot formally describe, but we all know what it means, right? The sense of flow, which is the feeling that my skills are closely related to the difficulty of a given task. So for an easy task, I can get around by being low skilled, but for more difficult tasks, I need to be evolved in terms of skills. And also the engagement that has to do with the narrative of the game and the different mechanisms that the game offers to me to play. So taking into account the different cultural aspects, we have the narrative. So there's the background story that may include myths, heroes of where I come from, or traditional stories. There are the winning or losing conditions, which may be different with respect to what happens in different societies. The number of players, we're talking mostly about multiplayer games, but they can be games for 2 or 4 players or even more. And another important aspect has to do with where those games are played and whether I have to use specific props or instruments like sticks, balls, or dice. So for instance, we have seen that different people not necessarily related to each other, such as Greeks, Spanish, and Koreans, may play the same games using the same mechanics or the same win conditions. And some of them can be traced back to earlier historical periods, and they have the actual game mechanics and the rules have evolved to fit the cultural aspect of each country. So the main question for our research, which is ongoing, as I said earlier, is whether we can use games to help the refugees and host communities come together and actually use the different aspects and mechanics of those games to show that people have more to share than divide with each other. So the first part had to do with empowering refugee children, discussing with them, getting to know them more, and giving them an opportunity to express themselves through a shared framework. And that framework had to do with a sort of formal representation of each game. This has to do with mostly analog games that children played at school or in open spaces, and use that shared framework to produce new codes of communication, essentially to create, design new games or modify existing ones to show that children can play with each other independent of their language, religion, or where they come from. And the way that we organized their study started with different focus groups where children would describe the games that they played back home to game designers and educators. It was important to use game designers at this point because, as I said, we wanted to use some sort of formal representation to identify the common parts of the games that children played back home. So each child would describe their own favorite game, the rules, and especially their feelings when they played these games with their peers or friends. The second part had to do with exchanging that formalized information with the other teams and discussing about the possible differences and similarities between the games that each team had to describe. And in this process, we also highlighted the cultural bridges, which usually correspond to the similarities between the different patterns identified in each game. And the final part had to do with using that information, using those common patterns to either design new games or modify the existing ones. And in some cases, children were actually very creative. For instance, they used the mechanics that we use in hopscotch, where we hop on one leg, to sort of create and design an adventure game with different quests that the players had to go through. So we're using the same skills in that particular example that hopscotch requires, which are dexterity and balance mostly, with a sense of following different steps one after the other and solving quests and responding to challenges that the environment may bring. And the fact that we use the game design canvas, which is a popular formalization with different boxes that game designers should fill. Each box corresponds to different aspects of the games, as I described earlier, helped us actually identify those common patterns I will talk about. And this process actually was a process that repeats itself. So children would design the new games or modify the existing ones. They would playtest their newly created games, and then would go back to the game design canvas to change the aspects of the games that they defined in order to make them more fun, more engaging, or even clarify some of the rules that caused the misunderstandings. We are now in the process of putting together all that information in written form, and I'm very happy to report that we had very positive feedback from both the games and their communities and their families. And we hope that in the future we will be able to use this kind of method or this kind of work to help, as I said, to integrate the immigrants to to our society, both in Europe and in other European countries. Thank you.